I think you're about to enjoy this. This is one of the special people in national life. This week yesterday, on September 3, was the 80th anniversary of the day when in 1939, Prime Minister Robert Menzies announced Australia was going to war. Peter and I, on Jones and Credlin last night, talked to Rear Admiral Guy Griffiths, a 96-year-old World War II veteran, a man who joined the Navy when he was 13 and served his country for more than 40 years before retiring as a Rear Admiral, a man who served his country in theatres of war around the world and who survived the Japanese sinking of his ship in a tragedy that left hundreds dead. But today, to a man who's made an unsurpassed commitment to helping the nation remember the history and sacrifices of Australia's times at war. Dr. Brendan Nelson has been the director of the Australian War Memorial since December 2012. I was very saddened, along with many, to read recently he'll be moving on at the end of the year. But there's more to be done before he goes. Brendan Nelson has written to me to tell me the Memorial have just released a documentary on the Hall of Memory, in which the unknown Australian soldier is interred. And Dr. Nelson tells us the primary focus of the documentary is on the, quote, values informing character in the 15 stained-glassed windows in the hall. More importantly, they want to get the documentary to schools and organisations involved in teaching young people. You'll find it on YouTube. Search for Hall of Memory, and you can buy it through the War Memorial website. Go to AWM, Australian War Memorial, awm.gov.au, and look in the shop for DVDs and CDs. Well, Dr. Brendan Nelson is always a welcome guest on this program, and he joins us from Canberra. So, Brendan, where are you going? That's the first thing. What are you doing to us?
Well, thank you, Alan, and thanks, Graham, for all the support you've given me in this role. Look, at this stage, I don't know. I've been approached about quite a few things in the last couple of weeks, but one of the important things I've learned in leadership is you need to know when it's time for renewal in an organisation, and I've been privileged to take the War Memorial along with our staff and volunteers to where it is now, and it's time to hand over to someone else. So,
well, tell us about the Hall of Memory.
Well, the Hall of Memory is at the very heart of the Australian War Memorial. So beneath that Byzantine-inspired dome, since 1993 has been interred the unknown Australian soldier. And standing sentinel above him are 15 stained glass windows. Each is a depiction of a serviceman and nurse from the First World War. And these were designed by Napier Wallet, the great muralist, artist and mosaicist, who fought in the First World War, had his right arm amputated, having been wounded at Bulcourt, and it would take him over 20 years to design what is there. But at the bottom of each one of those windows, Alan, is a single word. The founder of the Australian War Memorial, Charles Bean, who'd landed on Gallipoli, stayed with the Australians at the front through the entire war, and John Treloar, the first and longest-serving director, who was a veteran of both Gallipoli and France, asked themselves a very important question. They asked themselves, well, what are the qualities, what are the values we saw in these men and women that we regard as being essential, not just for victory in battle, but for depth and breadth of character? And character derives from the Greek word. It means the impression left in wax by a stone seal ring. The Greeks called it the stamp of personality. And as you and I know, what transcends everything in life, rank, power, money, influence, looks, intellect and talent, is character, informed by worthwhile intrinsic virtues or values. And the 15 that they distilled, which we focus on in this 30-minute film, which is of outstanding quality, these were distilled from and seen in the Australians of the First World War. And I'm happy to run through them all, but there are some extremely important lessons, especially for young people. And I say to young people, you don't realise what you're learning when you're learning it. And the most significant ideas and thoughts that challenge and change your thinking in life and attitude come in random moments of quiet revelation. And there's an immense amount to be learned in these 15 values. And I think one of the challenges we have, Alan, is in a world that isn't just changing, but where I think humankind's moving to a new age, we have to be very clear about who we are, in what it is we believe as Australians, the truths by which we live, and those things that we think are worth fighting to defend. And to young Australians especially, I say if you are looking for values for the world you want, as distinct from the one you think you're going to get, you need look no further than these in the Hall of Memory.
Can I ask you, Brendan, is there an Australian character, or is it just good character around the world and we're the Australian version of it? But is there what you would call an Australian character?
Graham, look, there are universal values and universal human ideals, irrespective of who we are, our culture, our background. But there are some things about us as Australians that are unique. Charles Bean, the founder of the Australian War Memorial, asked himself when writing the official history of the First World War, he asked himself what was it that was so special about the Australians? And he answered it thus. He said, the answer lay in the mettle of the men themselves, to be the kind of man that would give way when his mates were trusting to his firmness, to live the rest of his life haunted by the knowledge that he lacked the grit to carry it through. This, he said, was the prospect with which these men could not live. Life was very dear, but life was not worth living unless they could be true to their ideal of Australian manhood. And then 100 years later, we have in our galleries an SAS sergeant, Sergeant S, reflecting on the Battle of Teesark, in which Ben Robert Smith was awarded the Victoria Cross. Tears streaming down his cheeks, very unusual for an SAS sergeant. He said to fail would be worse than death. To let down your mates in combat would be worse than death. He said, yeah, that's the essence. You don't let your mates down. One of the 15 qualities seen in those Australians, which is featured in the Hall of Memory and in the film, is comradeship. And it's under a Lewis gunner. And we talk about mateship, this spirit that binds us in the face of adversity. And Charles Bean at Passchendaele in late 1917, Australia had 38,000 casualties in 8 weeks, 35 dead for every metre of ground that had been taken. And he wrote of the Australians in the blood, the mud and the slime of the agony of Passchendaele. He said wherever they went, they were sustained by belief in themselves and in one another, whether their own death or the end of the world would come. And there, in a sense, is who we are as Australians, and that unknown Australian soldier is not a general, definitely not an admiral, almost certainly, Graham, a private, a corporal, a sapper, a sergeant, a junior officer. He could be an Aboriginal Australian, but we are Australians. We revere the idealism and the heroism of the everyday Australian.
You know something? I just want to one thing. That was an extraordinary answer, and it underlines to me the kind of person you are. That really was stunning. So
amazing human.
Thank you very much.
Quite.
Sorry.
I agree entirely. An amazing human being, Brendan Nelson. Just on, we could be here for hours, Brendan, but I was looking today at these windows and what they symbolise, particularly in light of what you just said there, the west window, which you said represents social qualities, and they're spelt out, aren't they? Comradeship, ancestry, patriotism, chivalry. Who designed the windows in this way? Was that Napier?
That was Napier Waller, Alan. He did some remarkable works, particularly in Melbourne. He had 11 major works in Melbourne, including the Menzies Hotel and the Melbourne Town Hall. But it was he who conceived and designed these images of these Australians. And that wall that you speak of, it's comradeship, and then under a naval gunner there's ancestry. And you see immediately above his head there's an open book with a laurel wreath superimposed on it. A reverence for reading, of having a mind that is open, a mind that's open to other people and to new ideas. Cricket stumps, ball and bails, the importance of recreation, of no matter what the pressure you're under, including war, to have time to reflect and to have time away from, if you can, the intensity of it. And then further up above it, as there is in each of these windows, is a cathedral spire, which symbolises the philosophical inheritance we've received from Europe. And the value beneath is ancestry. You never forget from where you came, who gave you what you have, and made you who you are. And what I've observed is that over the recent years, young Australians, you and I, in fact, we three were born into an Australia that was defined by God, King and Country. for a lot of reasons, most of them not good. A lot of that's broken down. Young Australians are increasingly looking for and finding meaning in what it means to be an Australian, in the qualities that they find in these young men and women who wear and have worn our uniform.
Well, if I could just come in there, because then we look at the East Window, and this is what I love, because the East Window, because we want this to go to schools and we want the Hall of Memory to be understood, and the East Window, you say, represents the fighting qualities of youth and enterprise. And you mention, and we just take them very quickly, coolness, control, audacity, endurance and decision. Not bad.
Well, it's hard to go past them, and coolness and control, the importance of restraint. And as we three know through our lives, knowing when not to speak and act is often more important than the alternative. Under that light horseman, audacity, nothing of value in life is achieved without taking a risk. Endurance, as Churchill said, you never ever give up. And then under the Australian, in the summer of Gallipoli, decision, that ultimately we all have to make decisions. We have to be responsible for them. And as the Jesuits who educated me said of decision making, no such thing, they said, as big or small decisions. Every single decision has consequences for you and for others. And as I say to young people, those who trivialise certain decisions and say, well, that's not important, I'm not going to worry about it, they inevitably will be people who get into trouble.
It's magnificent. It is magnificent. And I should just say here, though he won't thank me for saying it, Kerry Stokes, one of, in my opinion, one of the great Australians, has indicated, I think, am I right, Brendan, that he is going to show this Hall of Memory and the documentary on the Channel 7 network, which will be good. Just summing up here, it's beautifully named in its brevity and yet in its relevance and symmetry, Hall of Memory. What memory overrides all others?
Well, I can't go any further, Alan, than Charles Bean and Napier Waller. The image that they chose to face directly down Anzac Parade to the Parliament is not a light horseman or a naval officer, it's a nurse. And at her feet is the word devotion, to completely subsume yourself into the people and the cause to which you've committed, and to ensure that your life is placed in the service of others, irrespective of the consequences to yourself. To me, that is my favourite, but it's like asking you to choose your favourite son or daughter. It's a difficult task.
Well, look, both of us, we're not here to embarrass you, but I'm speaking for hundreds of thousands of people who are watching right now. Brendan, what you've done to perpetuate the memory of these great Australians is extraordinary. Your capacity to articulate it is even more extraordinary. You're going to be a profound loss, but I suspect that you'll still be working in a field which honours the kind of things that you've done to date and the legacy that you've left. So thank you so much for talking and sharing. I hope before you go we'll be able to do it again. But magnificent tonight, Brendan. We're deeply in your debt.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Well, thank you to both of you, and whatever your viewers do two things. Buy a Legacy badge this week and have a look at this film.
Absolutely. So there you are. That's Dr. Brendan Nelson. The documentary you'll find on YouTube. Just search for Hall of Fame, and you can buy it through the War Memorial website, awm.gov.au, and look in the shop for DVDs and CDs. And, of course, remember, buy a badge for
Fame, is it? Hall of Memory, isn't it?
Hall of Memory.
Yes, you said Hall of Fame.
I'm sorry.
Just wanted to...
No, my apologies. No, Hall of Memory.
Yeah.
Oh, my apologies. I was thinking of you, famous person, but I meant memory. There we are. Dr. Brendan Nelson, lovely stuff.